The message on Bruno Mars's phone contained only 5 words. He never told you everything. Beneath those words was an old photograph of Bruno standing outside the tiny music venue where he had first met Daniel. But there was something strange about the picture. Bruno was not alone. Daniel stood beside him, smiling at the camera, and between them was a third person whose face had been carefully scratched out. It was 1:12 a.m. inside the fictional Harborview Arena in Los Angeles, and 20,000 people were still waiting for Bruno to return to the microphone. Unaware that the story behind the crying boy had just taken another unexpected turn, Bruno stared at the photograph. "Who sent this?" he asked again. The technician shook his head. "We don't know." Bruno looked at Michael. The older man's face had gone pale. "You know who that is?" Bruno said. Michael didn't answer. Bruno stepped closer. "Michael, who is the person in this picture?" Michael took a long breath. "Someone Daniel wanted you to forget." Bruno's expression hardened. "That's not an answer." Michael looked toward Eli. "Not here." Bruno immediately understood. "Then where?" Michael pointed toward a quiet hallway backstage. Bruno followed him, leaving Eli with his mother and Rachel. The noise of the crowd faded as they walked farther from the stage. When they reached an empty dressing room, Michael closed the door. Bruno held up the photograph. "Talk to me." Michael looked at the floor. His name was Aaron. Bruno stared at him. "Aaron who?" "Aaron Blake." Bruno's face changed. He remembered the name. Aaron had been another young musician around the same time as Daniel and Bruno. Someone who had disappeared from the scene years ago. "What happened to him?" Bruno asked. Michael sighed. "He blamed you." Bruno frowned. "For what?" Michael looked at the photograph. For getting the opportunity he thought should have been his. Bruno stared at him. "I didn't take anything from him." "I know." Michael nodded. But Aaron didn't see it that way. Bruno remembered the audition Daniel had helped him get. He remembered being terrified. He remembered walking into the room and performing. What he hadn't known was that Aaron had been scheduled to audition immediately after him. According to Michael, Aaron had walked out furious after hearing the producer choose Bruno. "He thought Daniel betrayed him," Michael said. "Why?" "Because Daniel had promised to recommend him." Bruno's eyes narrowed. "Daniel never told me." "Because he didn't want you to carry that guilt." Bruno sat down. "So Aaron disappeared?" Michael nodded. "He left Los Angeles. He moved away. Nobody heard much from him." Bruno looked at the photograph. "Then why send this now?" Michael shook his head. "I don't know." A knock came at the door. Eli's mother entered. "Eli wants Bruno." Bruno stood immediately. "Is he okay?" She nodded. "He's scared." Bruno walked back toward the stage area. Eli was standing near the piano, holding the photograph of his father. When he saw Bruno, he ran toward him. Bruno crouched down. "What's wrong?" Eli whispered. "People are leaving." Bruno looked toward the arena. The crowd was slowly beginning to disperse. "That's okay." Eli shook his head. "I thought they were going to stay." Bruno smiled. "They have families and homes." Eli looked disappointed. "I wanted them to hear the song again." Bruno laughed softly. "You don't need 20,000 people to make a song matter." Eli looked at him. "My dad said that?" Bruno smiled. "Something like that." Then Bruno noticed the photograph in Eli's hand. "Where did you get that?" Eli turned it around. It was a different photograph. Daniel was standing outside the same venue, but this time Aaron was visible. Eli pointed. "Who is he?" Bruno looked at Michael. "That's Aaron." Eli asked, "Was he your friend?" Bruno thought about it. "He was." Eli frowned. "What happened?" Bruno looked at him. "Sometimes people get hurt. Sometimes they don't know how to talk about it." Eli nodded slowly. Then he asked the question Bruno had been avoiding. "Did my dad do something bad?" Bruno immediately shook his head. "No." Eli looked relieved. Bruno continued. "Your dad made choices. Some were hard. Some were complicated. But he never stopped caring about people." Eli nodded. Then Bruno noticed another detail on the photograph. Behind Daniel and Aaron was a small whiteboard with a date written across it. October 19th. Tomorrow. Bruno looked at the clock. It was already October 19th. He turned toward Michael. "Why would Daniel mark this date?" Michael didn't answer. Rachel suddenly entered the room holding an old envelope. Because this was the day Daniel planned to finish everything. Bruno took the envelope. It was addressed to him. He opened it. Inside was a single sentence. If Aaron comes back, don't let him leave angry again. Bruno stared at the words. He knew Aaron would come back? Rachel nodded. Daniel was certain. Bruno looked at Michael. Where is he? Michael hesitated. I don't know. Suddenly the stage lights went off again. The arena fell quiet. A single spotlight appeared near the back entrance. A man stood there, older now, gray hair, dark jacket. His face was hard to see. Bruno's heart began pounding. The man walked slowly toward the stage. Security moved forward. Bruno raised his hand. Let him through. The man stopped several feet away. He looked at Bruno. You remember me? Bruno stared at him. Aaron? The man nodded. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Aaron looked at Eli. His expression softened. That's Daniel's son. Bruno nodded. Yes. Aaron looked at the boy. He looks just like him. Eli stepped closer to Bruno. Aaron noticed. Don't be afraid. Eli stared at him. Were you my dad's friend? Aaron smiled sadly. Once. Bruno looked at Aaron. Why did you send me the photograph? Aaron's face became serious. Because I wanted you to know the truth. Bruno crossed his arms. Which truth? Aaron took a breath. Daniel didn't betray me. Bruno looked confused. Aaron continued. I thought he did. For 20 years, I believed he chose you over me. I spent years angry at both of you. Bruno stared at him. And now? Aaron looked down. Daniel found me. Bruno's eyes widened. When? 6 months before he died. Aaron explained that Daniel had tracked him down after hearing he was sick with anger and regret. They met in a small coffee shop in another state. Daniel told him the truth about the audition. He had never promised Aaron the opportunity. Aaron had misunderstood a conversation. The producer had already been considering several musicians. Daniel had simply recommended both men. Bruno had been chosen because of his performance, not because Daniel had pushed Aaron aside. Aaron had spent 20 years blaming the wrong people. Why didn't Daniel tell me? Bruno asked. Aaron smiled sadly. Because he wanted you to keep moving forward. Bruno shook his head. He always did that. Aaron nodded. He was good at protecting people from things they deserved to know. Bruno looked at Eli. Not always. Aaron laughed softly. No, not always. Then Aaron reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cassette tape. Daniel gave me this. Bruno stared at it. What's on it? The conversation we had. Bruno looked toward Michael. Did you know? Michael shook his head. No. Aaron handed Bruno the tape. He told me to bring it to you if I ever found the courage. Bruno looked at the old cassette. Why tonight? Aaron looked toward Eli. Because Daniel told me his son would someday need to know that anger isn't the only way to remember someone. Eli watched them carefully. Bruno knelt beside him. Eli, there's something I want you to understand. The boy looked up. Your dad had people in his life who made mistakes. He made mistakes too. But what mattered was that he tried to make things right. Eli nodded. Aaron stepped closer. Your father helped me forgive myself. Eli looked at him. How? Aaron smiled. He reminded me that I had spent too much time being angry at a younger version of myself. Eli thought about that. Did he forgive you? Aaron's eyes filled with tears. Yes. Bruno looked at Aaron. Did you forgive him? Aaron nodded. Yes. Then Aaron turned toward Bruno. And I need to forgive you too. Bruno shook his head. You don't owe me anything. Aaron smiled. Maybe not. But I owe the kid a better story. He looked at Eli. Your dad was proud of you. Eli smiled. He told me that. Aaron nodded. He told everybody. Bruno laughed. Sounds like Daniel. Aaron smiled. Then he pulled another photograph from his pocket. It showed Daniel, Aaron, Michael, and Bruno sitting on the floor of the old venue, laughing. On the back were the words, "For idiots who thought music was everything." Bruno laughed through tears. That's definitely Daniel. The tension finally broke. Aaron laughed too. Michael wiped his eyes. Even Eli smiled. The old recording studio stood at the end of a narrow street where the city seemed to have forgotten it existed. Its windows covered with dust, its windows covered with dust, barely visible beneath a broken security light. It was 11:18 p.m. when Bruno Mars stepped out of the van with Eli's mother and Michael behind him. The noise of Los Angeles felt
There were
far
no
away
screaming
now.
fans.
There were
No
no
stage
screaming
lights.
fans, no
Stage
cameras,
lights.
and no band waiting
cameras,
for instructions.
and no band waiting
There
for
was only the
instructions.
quiet sound
There
of
was
traffic
only the
in
quiet
distance
sound of
and the
traffic
faint
in the
hum of the old
distance and the
building.
faint hum of
Bruno
the old
stared
building.
at the locked
Bruno
entrance.
stared at the
Are you
locked
sure
entrance.
this is the place?
Are you sure
Michael
this is the
nodded.
place?
Daniel
Michael
rented
nodded.
it for one
Daniel
night.
rented it
Bruno
for one
looked
night.
at him. Bruno
When?
looked at him.
3 weeks
When?
before he died.
3 weeks
Bruno's
before he
expression
died.
changed.
Bruno's expression changed.
He came here while he was sick.
He came here
Michael
while he
nodded.
was sick. Every
Michael
night
nodded.
for almost 2
Every
weeks.
night for almost
Eli
2
looked
weeks.
confused.
Eli looked
Why?
confused.
Michael glanced
Why?
at the boy.
Michael glanced
to finish
at the boy.
something.
To
Bruno
finish
looked
something.
at the building again.
Bruno looked at
the
the
song.
building again.
The song.
The song.
Michael
The
confirmed.
song. Bruno
Michael
took
confirmed.
a slow breath.
Bruno took
Then
a slow
let's
breath.
hear it. Then
Michael
let's hear
unlocked
it.
the door.
Michael
The
unlocked
hinges
the
made
door.
a long, painful
the hinges
sound
made a
as the
long,
door
painful
opened.
sound as the
Inside,
door opened.
The air
Inside,
smelled like dust.
The air
old
smelled
wood,
like dust
and electrical
old wood,
wires.
and
Bruno
electrical
switched
wires.
on a flashlight.
Bruno switched
The
on a
beam moved
flashlight.
across the hallway.
The beam moved across
revealing
the hallway.
old posters,
revealing
cracked
old
walls,
posters,
and a
cracked
small
walls,
recording room
and
behind
a
a
small
glass
recording
window.
room behind
Eli
a glass
stayed
window.
close to his
Eli
mother.
stayed close
Bruno
to his
walked
mother.
toward the studio
Bruno
door.
walked toward
A
the
handwritten
studio
note
door.
was taped
A
to it.
handwritten note
Bruno
was taped
pulled
to
it
it.
down.
Bruno
3
pulled
words
it down.
were written across
3
the
words
paper.
were written
Play
across
this
the
first.
paper.
Bruno
Play this
looked
first.
at Michael.
Bruno looked
First.
at Michael. Michael nodded.
First. Daniel
Michael
left
nodded.
instructions.
Daniel left
Bruno
instructions.
pushed the door open.
Bruno pushed
Inside
the door
was
open.
a small mixing desk.
Inside was a small
an old
mixing
microphone,
desk,
an
piano,
old microphone,
and a cassette
piano,
player sitting on
and
a
a
wooden
cassette
table.
player sitting on a
Beside
wooden
the cassette
table.
was another
Beside
note.
the cassette was
Bruno
another
picked
note.
it up. Bruno
For
picked
Bruno
it up.
and Eli.
For Bruno
stopped.
and Eli.
His eyes
He stopped.
immediately filled
His
with
eyes
tears.
immediately filled with tears.
He knew we'd come together.
He knew we'd
Michael
come
nodded.
together.
Bruno
Michael
sat
nodded.
down in front
Bruno
of the cassette
sat down
player.
in front of
He
the
looked
cassette
at Eli.
player.
You
He
want
looked
to
at
hear
Eli.
your dad?
You want to
Eli
hear your
nodded.
dad?
Bruno
Eli
pressed
nodded.
play.
Bruno
At first,
pressed
there was
play.
nothing but
At
static.
first, there was nothing
Then
but
came
static.
a soft cough.
Then came
a
a
man's
soft
breathing.
cough.
And
A man's
finally
breathing.
Daniel's voice.
And finally
Hey,
Daniel's
Bruno.
voice. Bruno
Hey,
froze.
Bruno.
Eli's
Bruno
mother
froze.
covered her mouth.
Eli's mother
Michael
covered her
lowered
mouth.
his eyes. Michael
The
lowered
recording
his eyes.
continued.
The recording
If you're hearing
continued.
this, if
Then
you're
I
hearing
guess
this,
the plan worked.
then I guess
Bruno
the plan
laughed
worked.
quietly through
Bruno
his
laughed
tears.
quietly
You
through
always
his
did
tears.
like making things
You always
complicated.
did like making things
Daniel
complicated
said
on the recording.
Daniel said
Bruno
on the
shook his
recording.
head.
Bruno
The voice
shook his
sounded
head.
older.
The voice
weaker,
sounded older,
but unmistakably
weaker,
alive.
but unmistakably
I don't know how
alive.
long this tape will
I don't
sit
know how
here.
long this
Maybe
tape
a
will
week.
sit here.
Maybe
Maybe
10
a week.
years. Maybe you'll
10
never
years.
hear it.
Maybe you'll
But if
never
you do,
hear it.
I
But
need
if
you
you
to
do,
listen all the way
I need
through.
you to listen
Bruno
all the way
leaned
through.
closer.
Bruno
Daniel
leaned
continued.
closer.
Daniel
First,
continued.
I'm sorry.
First,
Bruno
I'm
closed
sorry.
his eyes.
Bruno
Not
closed his
because I
eyes.
disappeared.
Not because
I didn't
disappeared.
disappear.
I
just
didn't
stopped
disappear.
trying to force my
I just
way
stopped
back into
trying
your
to
life.
force my way
The
back into
recording
your life.
crackled. The
I
recording
watched you
crackled.
become everything
I
you
watched
said
you
you
become
wanted to
everything
become.
you said you
I
wanted
saw
to
the
become.
arenas.
I
I
saw
saw
the
the
videos.
videos.
I saw the
crowds.
videos.
I
And
saw
every
the
time I
crowds.
saw you,
And every
I
time I saw
remembered the
you,
kid in that tiny
I remembered
room
the
who was
kid in that
terrified
tiny
nobody
room
would
who was
listen.
terrified
Bruno
nobody would
smiled.
listen.
Daniel
Bruno
continued.
smiled.
Daniel
You once
continued.
asked me why I
You
kept
once
taking
asked
pictures.
me why I kept
I told
taking
you
pictures.
it was because
I
moments
told you it was
disappear.
because
I
moments
didn't tell you the
disappear.
real reason.
I didn't tell you
I
the
took
real
pictures
reason
because I was
I took
afraid I'd
pictures
forget
because
who
I was
was.
afraid I'd forget
Eli
who I
looked
was.
at Bruno.
Eli
Bruno
looked at
wiped
Bruno.
his eyes.
Bruno
The
wiped
recording
his eyes.
continued.
The recording
Then I had
continued.
Eli.
Then
And
I had
suddenly
Eli.
I wasn't afraid
And
of
suddenly
forgetting
I
myself
wasn't afraid
anymore.
of forgetting
I
myself
was afraid
anymore.
of forgetting the
I was
kind of
afraid
father
of
I
forgetting
wanted
the
to
kind
be.
of father
Eli
I wanted to
stared
be.
at the speaker.
Eli stared
Dad.
at the speaker. He whispered.
Dad.
The room
He
became
whispered.
silent. The room
Daniel's
became
voice
silent.
continued.
Daniel's voice
Eli,
continued.
if you're listening to this
Eli,
someday,
if you're
I want
listening
you
to
to know
this someday,
someday,
I want you to
wasn't
know
brave
something.
because I
I
wasn't
wasn't
scared.
brave because I wasn't
brave
scared.
because I loved
I
you
was
more
brave
than I
because I
feared
loved
what was
you
coming.
more than I feared
Eli's
what was
face
coming.
crumpled.
Eli's
He
face
turned toward
crumpled.
his mother.
He turned
She
toward
wrapped
his
both
mother.
arms around
She
him.
wrapped both
Bruno
arms around
remained
him.
still,
Bruno
listening. remained still.
I know you'll
listening.
probably hear people
I know
say
you'll
I was
probably
sick.
hear people
They'll
say
tell
I
you
was
I
sick.
fought hard.
They'll tell you I was
hard.
strong. They'll tell
But
you
don't
I was
remember
strong.
me that way.
But don't remember me
that
burning
way.
pancakes.
Remember me burning
Remember me
pancakes.
dancing badly
Remember
in
me
the kitchen.
dancing badly
Remember
in the
me
kitchen.
pretending I knew
Remember
how to
me
fix
pretending
things.
I knew how
Remember
to
me
fix things.
singing too loud
Remember
in the
me
car.
singing too
Eli
loud in the
laughed
car.
through tears.
Eli laughed
His mother
through tears.
smiled. His
And
mother
remember
smiled.
that I believed in
and
you
remember
before
that I
you were
believed
old
in
enough
you
to
before
believe in
you were
yourself.
old enough to
The
believe in
recording
yourself.
paused.
The
There was a
recording
long
paused.
silence.
There was a
Then
long
Daniel's
silence.
voice returned.
Then Daniel's
Now,
voice
Bruno,
returned. There's
Now,
something I
Bruno,
need to tell you.
There's something
Bruno
I need to
leaned
tell
closer.
you. Bruno
The night
leaned
we
closer.
met, you changed
The
my
night
life.
we met, you
changed
didn't know
my
it.
life.
You probably
didn't
never
know it.
thought about
You
it
probably
again.
never thought
But
about
after
it
that night,
again.
But
I
after
went
that
home
night,
and wrote down
I
something
went
you
home
said.
and wrote down
Bruno
something
frowned.
you said.
What
Bruno
did I
frowned.
say? Daniel
What did I
answered.
say?
You
Daniel
told me
answered.
that you were scared.
You told me that
Bruno
you were
laughed
scared.
softly. Bruno
I
laughed
was.
softly. You said
I
you didn't
was.
know if you were
You
good
said
enough.
you didn't know if
I
you were
told you
good
that
enough.
you didn't need to
I
know.
told you that you
just
didn't need
needed
to
to
know.
keep playing.
You just needed
Bruno
to keep
looked
playing.
down.
Bruno
I forgot
looked
that
down.
conversation.
I forgot that
Daniel's voice
conversation.
softened. Daniel's
I
voice
didn't.
softened. Then came
I
a sound
didn't.
of paper
Then
moving.
came a sound of
I kept
paper
every
moving.
letter you
I
ever
kept
wrote me.
every letter you
every
ever
picture.
wrote me.
Every
Every
little
picture.
note.
I
Every
kept
little
them
note.
because you were the
I
first
kept
person
them
who
because
made
you
me
were the
believe
first
my
person
life
who
could
made
mean
me
something.
believe my life
Bruno
could mean
covered his
something.
face with
Bruno
one hand.
covered his face
Eli
with one
watched
hand.
him.
Eli
Then Daniel
watched
said
him.
something that
Then
changed
Daniel
the room.
said something that
But
changed
there's one
the
thing
room.
you don't know.
But there's one
I
thing
wasn't
you
the
don't
person
know.
who gave you
I
your
wasn't the
first
person
big
who gave you
opportunity.
your first
Bruno
big
slowly
opportunity.
lowered his
Bruno
hand.
slowly
What?
lowered his hand.
Daniel continued.
Daniel
I was the person
continued.
who almost
I was the
stopped
person
you from
who
getting
almost
it.
stopped
Bruno
you from
stared
getting it.
at the speaker.
Bruno stared
Michael
at the
looked
speaker.
away.
Michael
The night
looked
before
away.
your first
The
major
night
audition,
before your first
you were ready
major
to quit.
audition,
You
you
had
were ready to
decided
quit.
you were going
You
home.
had decided you
I
were
found
going
you
home.
outside the venue.
I found you outside
Bruno's
the
memory
venue.
began returning.
Bruno's memory
Parking
began
lot.
returning.
Rain.
Parking
A
lot.
teenager with
Rain.
a guitar.
A teenager with a
Conversation.
guitar. Daniel
Conversation.
standing beside him.
Daniel standing
I told
beside
you something
him.
that night.
I told you
Daniel
something that
said.
night. I told
Daniel
you to go
said.
inside.
I told you
Bruno's
to go inside.
eyes widened.
Bruno's
But
eyes
you didn't
widened.
tell me why.
But you didn't
Daniel's
tell me
recorded
why.
voice
Daniel's
became quieter.
recorded voice
Because
became
I had
quieter.
already made a call.
Because I had already
Bruno
made a
stared
call.
at Michael.
Bruno stared
What call?
at Michael. Michael
What
finally
call?
spoke.
Michael
Daniel
finally
called
spoke.
the producer.
Daniel called
Bruno
the
looked
producer.
shocked. Bruno
What?
looked shocked.
Michael nodded.
What?
Michael nodded.
He told them to give you 5
He
minutes.
told them to give you
Bruno
5
stood
minutes.
up.
You
Bruno
never
stood
told
up.
me that.
You never
Michael
told
shook
me
his
that.
head.
Michael
Daniel
shook his
didn't
head.
want you to know.
Daniel didn't
Bruno
want you to
stared
know.
at the floor.
Bruno stared at the
He
floor.
got me that audition.
He got me
He
that
got you in the
audition.
door. He got you
Michael
in the
said.
door. You did
Michael
the rest.
said.
You
Bruno
did the
sat
rest.
down again.
Bruno
Daniel's
sat down
voice
again.
continued.
Daniel's
I
voice
knew you were
continued.
talented.
I knew
But
you were
talent
talented.
wasn't the problem.
But talent
You
wasn't
were
the
afraid.
problem. So
You
I
were
lied.
afraid. Bruno
So I
smiled
lied.
faintly.
Bruno smiled
What did you
faintly.
lie about?
What did you
I told
lie
you
about?
the producer had
I
already
told you the
heard
producer
you and
had
wanted you
already
inside.
heard you and wanted
Bruno
you
laughed.
inside. Bruno
He
laughed.
hadn't.
No,
He hadn't.
Eli giggled.
No,
my
Eli
dad
giggled.
lied.
My
Bruno
dad
looked
lied.
at him. Bruno
Apparently.
looked at him. Daniel's
Apparently.
voice laughed through
Daniel's
the recording.
voice laughed
It was
through
the
the
only
recording.
lie I ever
It was
told
the only
Bruno,
lie I
and
ever
I
told
hope he
Bruno.
forgives me.
And I hope
Bruno
he
shook
forgives
his
me.
head. Bruno
Tears
shook his
falling
head
freely now.
Tears falling
You
freely
idiot.
now. He whispered.
You idiot.
You
He
absolute
whispered.
idiot.
You
Then
absolute
Daniel
idiot.
said. Then
There's
Daniel
another
said,
reason I made that
There's
call.
another reason I
The
made
recording
that call.
paused. The
Because
recording
I knew
paused.
one day you would
Because
help
I knew
someone
one
else
day
the
you
same
would
way.
help someone else
Bruno's
the same
expression
way.
changed.
Bruno's
He
expression
looked toward
changed.
Eli.
He looked
Daniel
toward
continued.
Eli.
Daniel
That's why I'm
continued.
asking you
That's
for
why
one
I'm
final
asking
favor.
you for one
The room
final
became
favor.
silent.
The room
Don't
became
take care of
silent.
Eli for me.
Don't take care of
Don't
Eli
try
for
to
me.
become his father.
Don't try to become
Don't promise
his
his
father.
mother anything
Don't
you
promise
can't
his
keep.
mother anything
Just
you
give
can't
him
keep.
one thing.
Just give
Bruno
him one
whispered.
thing. Bruno
What?
whispered. Daniel's recorded voice answered.
Daniel's recorded voice
A reason to
answered.
keep believing
A
in
reason
himself.
to keep believing
Bruno
in
closed
himself.
his eyes.
Bruno
The
closed
tape
his
continued.
eyes.
The tape
He loves
continued.
music, but I don't
He
want
loves
him
music,
to think he
but
has
I
to
don't
become
want
a
him to think
musician
he has
because
to
I was
become a
one.
musician
I don't
because
want
I was
him to
one.
become a
I
photographer
don't want him to
because I
become
was
a
one.
photographer
I don't
because I
want
was
him to
one.
become anything
I don't want him
because
to
people
become
expect it.
anything because
I
people
want him to
expect it.
find something that
I want
makes
him to
feel
find
alive.
something that makes him
Eli
feel
looked
alive.
at the floor.
Eli looked
Dad
at
knew
the
I
floor.
liked music.
Dad knew I
Bruno
liked
smiled.
music.
Bruno
He did.
smiled.
But he said I
did.
could do anything.
But he said I could
Exactly.
do anything. Daniel
Exactly.
continued.
Daniel
Bruno,
continued.
if you're still the man
And Bruno,
I remember,
if you're still the
you'll
man I
understand
remember,
that sometimes
you'll
helping
understand
somebody
that
means
sometimes
knowing
helping
when to
somebody
step back.
means knowing
Bruno
when to step
nodded
back.
slowly.
Bruno
Then
nodded
Daniel
slowly.
said the words
Then
that broke
Daniel
him.
said the words
You
that
gave me
broke him.
courage once.
You gave me
I'm
courage
asking
once.
you to give my son I'm asking you to give my son some now. The recording ended with a click. The recording ended with a click. No dramatic ending. No dramatic ending. Bruno sat motionless. Bruno sat motionless. Stood beside him. Eli stood His mother cried quietly. His mother cried Michael quietly. Looked through the glass window toward the empty studio. For almost a minute. Nobody spoke for almost a minute. Then Eli whispered. Then Eli really knew you. Bruno really knew him. Bruno looked at him. And you really knew him. And you really knew him. Sadly. Bruno smiled. I wish I'd known him longer. I wish I'd known him longer. For his hand. Eli reached for his hand. You know what? Took it. Bruno said. You know what? I think we have something to finish. I think we have something to finish. Eli looked toward the piano. Eli looked toward the piano. Bruno nodded. The song. The song. Bruno nodded. Michael pointed toward a small folder on the piano. That's the last part.
That's
Bruno
the last
walked
part.
over and opened
Bruno
it.
walked over
Inside
and opened
were
it.
handwritten musical
Inside
notes.
were handwritten
The
musical
melody was
notes.
simple but
The
beautiful.
melody was simple
At the
but
top,
beautiful.
Daniel had written
At the
two
top,
words.
Daniel had
Keep
written
going.
2 words. Bruno
Keep
stared
going.
at the page.
Bruno stared at the page. Bruno stood completely still beneath the bright arena lights, the letter pressed against his chest while 20,000 people waited for him to speak. Eli was still holding his hand, unaware that the few words written on that page had just reopened a part of Bruno's past he had buried for years. The band members remained frozen on stage, unsure whether they should continue the concert or wait. Bruno looked at Michael. "You knew about this?" Michael nodded. "Daniel told me everything." Bruno's jaw tightened. "Then why didn't you tell me?" Michael took a slow breath. "Because Daniel asked me not to." Bruno looked down at the letter again. "He could have called me. He tried." Bruno looked up sharply. "What?" Michael's eyes became heavy with regret. "He tried more than once." The words hit Bruno harder than anything else that night. "When?" "After you became famous. He found an old number for your management. He sent messages. He even went to one of your shows." Bruno stared at him. "I never knew." "I know." Michael glanced toward the crowd. "Daniel didn't want to chase you. He told me that if you ever crossed paths again, it had to happen naturally." Bruno looked toward Eli. "And that's why you brought him here?" Michael shook his head. "No. Daniel's wife brought him here. I only made sure the letter arrived." Bruno turned toward Eli's mother. She looked exhausted, as if she had been carrying a secret for months. "Why didn't you tell me?" Bruno asked. She looked down. "Because Daniel told me not to." Bruno closed his eyes. "Everybody knew except me." "Not everybody," she said softly. "I didn't know the whole story either." Bruno looked at the letter. "Then let's read it." He sat on the edge of the stage. Eli sat beside him. The mother stood nearby. Michael remained a few steps away. Bruno unfolded the paper again. His voice was quiet as he began reading. "Bruno, if you're reading this, then somehow my son found his way to you. I don't know if you'll remember me. I don't know if you'll be angry. And I don't know if I'll still be here when this reaches you." Bruno stopped. He swallowed and continued. "But I need you to know something. The night we met was the night I decided my life could be bigger than the place I came from." Bruno looked at Eli. The boy was listening carefully. "Your father wrote that?" Eli asked. Bruno nodded. "Yeah." He continued. "Daniel wrote about the tiny venue where he had first seen Bruno perform. He had been a teenager with a camera and no idea what he wanted to do with his life. Bruno had been struggling, performing for small crowds, wondering whether he should keep chasing music. Daniel had approached him after the show and said something Bruno remembered almost word for word. "You don't need everybody to believe in you. You just need one person to start." Bruno stopped reading. A tear rolled down his cheek. "That's exactly what he said." Eli smiled. "He said you remembered." Bruno laughed softly. "Your dad was right." Then he looked back at the letter. "Daniel wrote that he knew I would eventually leave that little room. He knew I would travel. He knew I would become busy. But he said he hoped I would never forget the people who were there before the lights." Bruno looked across the arena. The irony wasn't lost on him. 20,000 people were staring at him now. But he was thinking about 30 people in a room nobody remembered. Then he reached the next part of the letter. His expression changed. "There is something I never told you." Bruno stopped. Eli looked at him. "What?" Bruno shook his head. "I'm not sure." He read silently for several seconds. Then he whispered, "Daniel knew he was sick." Eli's mother closed her eyes. She had heard this before. Bruno continued. "He knew he didn't have much time, but he didn't want his illness to become the center of his family's life." Bruno looked toward the boy. He wanted Eli to remember his father laughing, not his father in a hospital bed. Eli's face fell. Was he scared? Bruno looked at him. "Probably." The boy stared at the floor. "He never told me." "That's because he wanted to protect you." Bruno placed a hand on Eli's shoulder. "Parents do that sometimes." Eli looked up. "Did you know he was sick?" Bruno shook his head. "No." Michael spoke from behind them. "Daniel never told you because he didn't want you to feel responsible." Bruno turned. "Responsible for what?" Michael took a breath. "For not being there." Bruno's expression hardened. But I would have gone. Daniel knew that. Then why keep it from me? Michael looked at him. Because he knew you would have stopped everything. Bruno didn't answer. Michael continued. He didn't want your career to become his goodbye. The words stayed in the air. Bruno looked down at his hands. For the first time that night, he seemed less like a superstar and more like a man trying to understand a friend he had lost. I would have gone, he repeated quietly. I know, Michael said. That's exactly why he didn't tell you. Eli suddenly asked, did my dad really think Bruno was his friend? Bruno looked at him. Yeah. Eli smiled. He called you his friend. Bruno's eyes filled again. Then he was right. The crowd began to applaud softly. Bruno looked toward the audience. You know what? He said into the microphone. I think we should tell you guys the rest. The audience cheered. Bruno turned to his band. Can we slow this down? The drummer nodded. The keyboard player began playing gentle chords. Bruno remained seated at the edge of the stage. Tonight wasn't supposed to be like this, he said. We were supposed to sing, dance, have a good time, and we're still going to do that. But sometimes life walks into a concert and reminds you that the person standing next to you might be carrying a story you know nothing about. The crowd became quiet again. Bruno looked at Eli. And this little guy has been carrying one. Eli looked embarrassed. Bruno smiled. You okay? Eli nodded. A little. That's enough. The audience laughed softly. Then Bruno asked him, what was your dad's favorite song? Eli thought for a moment. The one you were singing when I started crying. Bruno raised his eyebrows. Really? Eli nodded. He used to play it in the car. Bruno smiled. Then I guess we have to finish it. He stood and helped Eli onto the stage. The crowd erupted. Bruno took the boy's hand and walked him toward the center. Eli looked overwhelmed by the thousands of faces. I don't know what to do. Bruno leaned down. Neither do I. Eli looked surprised. Bruno smiled. That's the truth. Sometimes you just take the next step. The band began the song again. Bruno started singing. Eli stood beside him. At first the boy barely moved. Then, during the chorus, he began singing quietly. Bruno heard him and stepped away from the microphone. He let Eli sing alone for a few seconds. 20,000 people listened to a child's trembling voice fill an arena. When Eli finished, the crowd erupted. Bruno hugged him. You did great. Eli laughed through tears. My dad would have liked that. Bruno nodded. He would have loved it. Then something unexpected happened. A woman near the front shouted, Daniel! Another person repeated it. Soon hundreds of people were saying the name. Bruno looked surprised. He raised the microphone. You know his name? The woman shouted back. My brother worked with him. Bruno stared. Another man called out. He helped my daughter. A third voice said, Daniel took pictures at our wedding. Bruno looked around the arena in disbelief. Eli's mother covered her mouth. Michael smiled. I told you. Bruno turned toward him. What? Michael said. Daniel never stopped believing in people. Slowly, stories began coming from the crowd. One fan said Daniel had once given him a ride home when his car broke down. Another remembered him photographing a community fundraiser. Someone else said Daniel had helped a young musician get his first performance. Bruno listened. Eli listened. His mother cried quietly. Daniel had never been famous. He had never stood on a stage like this. But suddenly Bruno understood that his friend had left footprints everywhere. The arena wasn't just 20,000 strangers anymore. It was 20,000 people hearing about a man who had made a difference without expecting anyone to remember. Bruno looked at Eli. You see that? Eli nodded. That's your dad. The boy looked around. He knew all these people? Maybe not all of them, Bruno said. But they knew him. The moment was beautiful. But then Michael's expression changed. He looked toward Bruno. There's one more thing. Bruno sighed. Of course there is. Michael smiled faintly. Daniel wanted you to see something after the concert. Bruno looked at the clock. It was nearly 10:30 p.m. Where? The old venue. Bruno's eyes widened. It's still there. The building is. The venue isn't. Bruno looked at Eli's mother. She seemed surprised too. Daniel asked us to go there tonight? Michael nodded. He wanted Eli to see where everything started. Bruno looked at the crowd. The concert wasn't over, but suddenly he knew what he had to do. Then let's go. The audience erupted in confusion when Bruno announced that he was going to take a short break. The scream of 20,000 fans was still shaking the walls when Bruno Mars suddenly stopped singing. It was Friday night, October 18th, 2024, 9:47 p.m., inside the fictional Harborview Arena in Los Angeles, California. A sea of lights filled the darkness as Bruno stood beneath a single white spotlight, microphone in hand, surrounded by his band and thousands of screaming fans. Everything had been perfect. The music was loud, the crowd was dancing, and Bruno had been smiling through the entire performance. Then, in the middle of the song, he heard something that didn't belong. A child was crying. At first, Bruno thought it was part of the crowd noise. Then he heard it again. A small, broken sob. He stopped singing. The band continued for 2 more seconds before realizing something was wrong. The drummer slowed down. The guitarist lowered his hands. Bruno turned toward the audience. 20,000 people slowly stopped moving. Bruno looked across the front rows. "Hold on," he said quietly. "Give me a second." The arena fell into an uncomfortable silence. Bruno walked toward the edge of the stage and listened. There it was again. A little boy crying. Bruno's expression changed. He looked toward security. "Can you find where that's coming from?" One security guard immediately moved through the crowd. The boy was sitting beside a woman near the front of the stage. He looked about 7 years old. His face was buried against his mother's arm, his shoulders shaking. The woman kept whispering something into his ear, trying to calm him down. Bruno watched them carefully. Then the boy looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, everything else disappeared. Bruno lowered the microphone. "Hey, buddy." The boy froze. His mother looked toward the stage. Bruno smiled gently. "What's your name?" The boy didn't answer. He looked down again. His mother leaned toward him. "It's okay. You can tell him." Finally, the boy whispered something. Bruno couldn't hear it. He leaned closer. "What was that?" The boy looked up. "Eli." Bruno nodded. "Eli, that's a good name." The crowd gave a soft cheer, but Bruno raised one finger, asking everyone to stay quiet. "Hey, Eli, why are you crying?" The boy's mother opened her mouth, but Eli answered first. "Because my dad said you'd remember him." Bruno's smile disappeared. He stared at the child. "What did you say?" Eli wiped his face. "My dad said you'd remember him." Bruno slowly lowered himself to sit on the edge of the stage. The entire arena was watching. "What's your dad's name?" Eli looked at his mother. She hesitated. Then she whispered, "Daniel." Bruno's eyes changed instantly. He looked away for a second, as though searching through a memory buried somewhere deep. "Daniel what?" The woman answered quietly, "Daniel Carter." Bruno stopped breathing for a moment. The name hit him harder than anyone in the arena could understand. He looked down at the floor. His fingers tightened around the microphone. "Daniel Carter?" he repeated. The woman nodded. "You knew him?" Bruno didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Eli. "Where is your dad?" Eli's lower lip trembled. "He's gone." Bruno's eyes filled with emotion. "I'm sorry, buddy." Eli nodded. "He died last year." The crowd became completely silent. Bruno stood slowly. "How old are you?" 7. Bruno nodded. "And your dad told you I'd remember him?" Eli nodded again. "He said you were his friend." Bruno closed his eyes for a moment. Then he whispered, "Yeah, I knew your dad." The crowd reacted with a quiet gasp. Bruno walked toward the side of the stage. A security guard approached him. Bruno pointed toward Eli. "Can I go down there?" The guard hesitated, then nodded. Bruno carefully climbed down from the stage. The crowd erupted, but Bruno didn't look at them. He walked directly toward the little boy. When he reached him, he crouched down. Eli stared at him through tears. Bruno smiled softly. "Come here." Eli stepped forward. Bruno wrapped his arms around him. The boy immediately began crying harder. Bruno held him tightly and whispered, "I'm sorry you had to miss him." Eli whispered into Bruno's shoulder, "I miss him every day." Bruno closed his eyes. "I know." When they separated, Bruno noticed something in Eli's hand. It was a photograph. Old, bent. The edges were worn. Bruno pointed at it. What's that? Eli looked down. My dad gave it to me. Bruno's face became serious. Can I see it? Eli looked toward his mother. She nodded. The boy slowly handed it over. Bruno took the photograph. He looked at it under the stage lights. His face immediately went pale. It showed a much younger Bruno standing outside a tiny music venue beside a teenage boy holding a camera. Bruno stared at the image. He recognized the boy instantly. Daniel, where did you get this? Bruno whispered. Eli's mother answered. Daniel kept it for years. Bruno turned the photograph over. There was handwriting on the back. 6 words. Don't forget where the music started. Bruno stared at those words for several seconds. Then he looked at Eli's mother. He kept this. She nodded. He talked about you all the time. Bruno swallowed hard. I haven't seen this picture in years. Eli looked at him. Dad said you were going to be famous. Bruno smiled through tears. Your dad said that? All the time. Bruno laughed softly. He was always better at believing in me than I was. The crowd laughed gently, but Bruno's eyes remained wet. He sat on the floor beside Eli. Where did your dad meet me? Eli's mother answered. At a little music venue downtown. He was a teenager. Bruno nodded. Yeah, I remember that night. He looked toward the stage as if he could see the past playing in front of him. There were maybe 30 people in the room. I had no idea what I was doing. He smiled. Your dad stood right in front of the stage with this huge camera. Eli grinned. He took pictures? A lot of pictures. Bruno looked at the photograph. He told me I was going to make it. Eli asked, Did you believe him? Bruno shook his head. Not even a little. Eli smiled for the first time that night. He did. Bruno looked at him. Yeah, the message on Bruno Mars's phone
Eli's mother
contained
reached
only
into
5
her
words.
purse.
He
There's
never told
something
you
else.
everything. Bruno
Beneath
looked
those
at her.
words was an old
She pulled out
photograph
a
of Bruno
folded piece
standing
of paper.
outside the tiny
Daniel
music venue
wanted
where
you
he
to
had
have
first
this.
met Daniel.
Bruno stared
But there was
at
something
the paper.
strange about the
What's
picture.
that? Bruno
A
was
letter.
not alone. Bruno took
Daniel
it slowly.
stood beside him.
He looked at the
smiling
envelope.
at the camera.
His name was
And
written
between
across
them was
the
a
front
third
in
person
handwriting
whose
he
face
hadn't
had been
seen in
carefully
years.
scratched out.
Bruno's
It was
fingers
1:12
began to
a.m.
shake.
inside the Fictional
He didn't
Harborview
open it.
Arena in Los
When
Angeles.
did he write this?
And 20,000
Before
people
he
were still
died.
waiting for
Bruno
Bruno to
looked at
return
her.
to the microphone.
Did he tell you what
Unaware
was
that the
inside?
story behind
She
the
shook her
crying
head.
boy had just taken another
He only
unexpected
told me
turn.
one thing.
Bruno stared
What?
at the
She
photograph.
looked directly
Who
at Bruno.
sent this? He asked again.
He said if
The
Eli
technician
ever
shook
met
his
you,
head.
you would understand.
We don't know.
Bruno stared
Bruno
at
looked
her.
at Michael.
Understand
The older
what?
man's face had
She didn't
gone pale.
answer. You know
Before
who
Bruno
that is?
could ask again,
Bruno said.
The arena
Michael
lights
didn't
suddenly
answer.
flickered.
Bruno
Once,
stepped closer.
Twice.
Michael.
Then everything went
Who
black.
was the person in this
20,000
picture?
people
Michael
gasped.
took a long breath.
The band members froze
Someone
on
Daniel
stage.
wanted you
Emergency
to forget.
lights slowly
Bruno's
came on,
expression hardened,
bathing the arena
That's
in
not
a
an
dim red
answer.
glow.
Michael
Bruno
looked toward
immediately
Eli.
reached for Eli.
Not here. Stay
Bruno
with me.
immediately
The boy
understood.
grabbed his hand.
Then where?
Somewhere behind the
Michael
stage.
pointed toward a
A
quiet
voice suddenly
hallway
called out.
backstage.
Bruno
followed
Bruno
him,
turned,
leaving
The
Eli
voice
with
came
his
again.
mother and Rachel.
Bruno Mars.
The noise of the
He
crowd
stared
faded
into the
as they
darkness.
walked farther
Who
from
said
the
that?
stage.
No
when they
answer.
reached an empty
Security
dressing room,
moved toward
Michael
the
closed
backstage
the door.
entrance.
Bruno
held
raised
up
his
the
hand.
photograph.
Wait, talk to me.
Then an older
Michael
man
looked
stepped
slowly
slowly
into the emergency
His
light.
name was
He was
Aaron.
carrying an old
Bruno
camera.
stared at him.
Bruno stared
Aaron
at him.
who?
The
Aaron
man looked
Blake.
at the photograph
Bruno's
in
face
Bruno's
changed.
hand. You
still
remembered
have
the
it,
name, he said.
Aaron had
Bruno's
been
face
another
went
young
blank.
musician around the
Michael,
same time as
the
Daniel
old man
and Bruno.
smiled sadly.
Someone who had
You remember
disappeared
me.
from the scene
Bruno
years ago.
took one step
What happened
forward.
to him?
Where have
Bruno
you been?
asked.
Michael
Michael
sighed.
looked toward Eli.
He blamed you.
I've been waiting
Bruno
for him.
frowned. Bruno
For
looked
what?
confused.
Michael looked
For
at the
Eli.
photograph.
Michael nodded.
Forgetting the opportunity,
Daniel
he
asked me
thought
to make
should have
sure
been
his son heard the
Bruno
truth.
stared at
Bruno's
him.
heart sank.
I didn't take
What
anything
truth?
from him. Michael
I
reached
know.
inside his
Michael
jacket
nodded.
and pulled out
But
another
Aaron
envelope.
didn't see it that
The
way.
truth about the
Bruno
night you
remembered
met
the
Daniel.
audition Daniel
Bruno
had helped
stared
him get.
at the envelope.
He remembered
Eli's
being
mother
terrified.
looked frightened.
He remembered
What are you
walking
talking
into the
about?
room and performing.
Michael looked at her.
What he hadn't
Daniel
known was
never
that
told
Aaron
you
had been
everything.
scheduled to audition
Bruno looked
immediately
from
after
Michael
him.
to the woman
According
and
to
then
Michael,
back at Eli.
Aaron had
Suddenly
walked
the
out
crying
furious
boy
after
wasn't
hearing
just
the
a fan
producer
who had
choose
stopped
Bruno.
the concert.
He thought
He was
Daniel
connected to a
betrayed
part
him.
of Bruno's
Michael
past
said
that Bruno thought
Why?
had disappeared
Because
forever.
Daniel had
Michael
promised
held
to
the
recommend
envelope
him.
out. Bruno's
Daniel
eyes
wanted
narrowed.
Bruno to open
Daniel
this only
never
when
told
Eli
me,
was standing
because
beside
he didn't
him.
want you to
Bruno
carry that
slowly
guilt.
reached for it.
Bruno sat
The
down.
entire arena
So
watched.
Aaron
He
disappeared?
broke the seal.
Michael
He
nodded.
unfolded the first
He
page.
left Los Angeles.
His eyes moved
He
across
moved
the
away.
words.
Nobody
his
heard
breathing
much from
stopped.
him. Bruno
No,
looked at the
Bruno
photograph.
whispered.
Then
Eli
why
looked
send
up at
this
him.
now? What's
Michael
wrong?
shook his head.
Bruno couldn't answer.
I don't know.
He read
A
the
knock
first
came
sentence
at the door.
again.
His
Eli's
eyes
mother
filled with
entered.
tears.
Eli
Then he
wants
looked at
Bruno.
Michael.
Bruno
This
stood
can't be
immediately.
true.
Michael
Is he
nodded.
okay?
She nodded. He's scared. Bruno walked back toward the stage area. Eli was standing near the piano, holding the photograph of his father. When he saw Bruno, he ran toward him. Bruno crouched down. What's wrong? Eli whispered. People are leaving. Bruno looked toward the arena. The crowd was slowly beginning to disperse. That's okay. Eli shook his head. I thought they were going to stay. Bruno smiled. They have families and homes. Eli looked disappointed. I wanted them to hear the song again. Bruno laughed softly. You don't need 20,000 people to make a song matter. Eli looked at him. My dad said that? Bruno smiled. Something like that. Then Bruno noticed the photograph in Eli's hand. Where did you get that? Eli turned it around. It was a different photograph. Daniel was standing outside the same venue, but this time Aaron was visible. Eli pointed. Who is he? Bruno looked at Michael. That's Aaron. Eli asked, was he your friend? Bruno thought about it. He was. Eli frowned. What happened? Bruno looked at him. Sometimes people get hurt. Sometimes they don't know how to talk about it. Eli nodded slowly. Then he asked the question Bruno had been avoiding. Did my dad do something bad? Bruno immediately shook his head. No. Eli looked relieved. Bruno continued. Your dad made choices. Some were hard. Some were complicated. But he never stopped caring about people. Eli nodded. Then Bruno noticed another detail on the photograph. Behind Daniel and Aaron was a small whiteboard with a date written across it. October 19th. Tomorrow. Bruno looked at the clock. It was already October 19th. He turned toward Michael. Why would Daniel mark this date? Michael didn't answer. Rachel suddenly entered the room holding an old envelope. Because this was the day Daniel planned to finish everything. Bruno took the envelope. It was addressed to him. He opened it. Inside was a single sentence. If Aaron comes back, don't let him leave angry again. Bruno stared at the words. He knew Aaron would come back? Rachel nodded. Daniel was certain. Bruno looked at Michael. Where is he? Michael hesitated. I don't know. Suddenly the stage lights went off again. The arena fell quiet. A single spotlight appeared near the back entrance. A man stood there, older now, gray hair, dark jacket. His face was hard to see. Bruno's heart began pounding. The man walked slowly toward the stage. Security moved forward. Bruno raised his hand. Let him through. The man stopped several feet away. He looked at Bruno. You remember me? Bruno stared at him. Aaron? The man nodded. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Aaron looked at Eli. His expression softened. That's Daniel's son. Bruno nodded. Yes. Aaron looked at the boy. He looks just like him. Eli stepped closer to Bruno. Aaron noticed. Don't be afraid. Eli stared at him. Were you my dad's friend? Aaron smiled sadly. Once. Bruno looked at Aaron. Why did you send me the photograph? Aaron's face became serious. Because I wanted you to know the truth. Bruno crossed his arms. Which truth? Aaron took a breath. Daniel didn't betray me. Bruno looked confused. Aaron continued. I thought he did. For 20 years, I believed he chose you over me. I spent years angry at both of you. Bruno stared at him. And now? Aaron looked down. Daniel found me. Bruno's eyes widened. When? 6 months before he died. Aaron explained that Daniel had tracked him down after hearing he was sick with anger and regret. They met in a small coffee shop in another state. Daniel told him the truth about the audition. He had never promised Aaron the opportunity. Aaron had misunderstood a conversation. The producer had already been considering several musicians. Daniel had simply recommended both men. Bruno had been chosen because of his performance, not because Daniel had pushed Aaron aside. Aaron had spent 20 years blaming the wrong people. Why didn't Daniel tell me? Bruno asked. Aaron smiled sadly. Because he wanted you to keep moving forward. Bruno shook his head. He always did that. Aaron nodded. He was good at protecting people from things they deserved to know. Bruno looked at Eli. Not always. Aaron laughed softly. No, not always. Then Aaron reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cassette tape. Daniel gave me this. Bruno stared at it. What's on it? The conversation we had. Bruno looked toward Michael. Did you know? Michael shook his head. No. Aaron handed Bruno the tape. He told me to bring it to you if I ever found the courage. Bruno looked at the old cassette. Why tonight? Aaron looked toward Eli. Because Daniel told me his son would someday need to know that anger isn't the only way to remember someone. Eli watched them carefully. Bruno knelt beside him. Eli, there's something I want you to understand. The boy looked up. Your dad had people in his life who made mistakes. He made mistakes too. But what mattered was that he tried to make things right. Eli nodded. Aaron stepped closer. Your father helped me forgive myself. Eli looked at him. How? Aaron smiled. He reminded me that I had spent too much time being angry at a younger version of myself. Eli thought about that. Did he forgive you? Aaron's eyes filled with tears. Yes. Bruno looked at Aaron. Did you forgive him? Aaron nodded. Yes. Then Aaron turned toward Bruno. And I need to forgive you too. Bruno shook his head. You don't owe me anything. Aaron smiled. Maybe not. But I owe the kid a better story. He looked at Eli. Your dad was proud of you. Eli smiled. He told me that. Aaron nodded. He told everybody. Bruno laughed. Sounds like Daniel. Aaron smiled. Then he pulled another photograph from his pocket. It showed Daniel, Aaron, Michael, and Bruno sitting on the floor of the old venue, laughing. On the back were the words, "For idiots who thought music was everything." Bruno laughed through tears. That's definitely Daniel. The tension finally broke. Aaron laughed too. Michael wiped his eyes. Even Eli smiled.